Mr. Steve Maximay, a CSME resident of Grenada, is the managing director of the Science-Based Initiatives, a virtual consulting firm launched in 2003. He is currently the climate smart agriculture and marketing expert with the regional PISLM soil care project and has worked in every CARICOM country. He is a plant pathologist by initial training. He headed the farm management and training unit at the Trinidad and Tobago Agriculture Development Bank and managed the first business office in a science faculty at UE. An experienced strategic planning and foresighting facilitator, he led WINFA planning process that heralded the fair trade banana era and was president of the farmer-owned Montage Estate in St. Vincent. He directed the Trinidad and Tobago Biotechnology Foresighting Project and facilitated the regional biotechnology roadmap in Jamaica. A recognized planetary health advocate, he's been part of the PAHO and Earth Medic public education drives. He's a WIPO consultant and a member of the cabinet-appointed team that wrote the intellectual property policy for Trinidad and Tobago, and he produced the IP strategy for that country in 2013. He brings his pioneering perspective on the triple carriageway resulting from merged lanes of creativity, science, and intellectual property to this session on fast tracking. Thank you very much, Professor. Let me invite Mr. Maximay to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, and good morning, all. I have some good and exciting news. I'll be using all 10 of my minutes, so you needn't panic. No, I have been asked to speak at this forum, and I was going through some of the advice given to the OECS Commission that they should focus on 3 pillars of FAST: transport, logistics, and trade, private sector development involving production, processing, distribution, etc., and climate resilient agriculture. And this is the one area that I know a little bit about. So I'm going to focus my 9.5 remaining minutes on just that. Now, all investments in agriculture as of 10 years ago must be seen through a climate change lens. Anyone, whether you're a micro investor or macro investor, whether you go to your credit union and get $5,000 to plant a crop and you ignore the climate crisis, you are doomed. Right? And this bears a little repetition. You are doomed. So everything has to be viewed through this climate change lens, this climate crisis lens. And significant funds are available, and Minister Caesar and I have had a long history of looking at some of these ways of incorporating climate finance into everyday agricultural activities, so that there are concessionary loans and grants available to the private sector. And I'm glad that the head of ECA in the region is here, my good friend Greg Rollins, because they would know that ECA has pioneered one of the UNFCCC GCF grants dealing with what they are referring to as climate responsive agriculture, but what is really climate smart agriculture on another rubric. So that the money is there. And as a private sector representative, I'm telling you that the money is there. We just have to be very, very aware of how you can access it. So although we are concentrating most times on UNFCCC, which has to do with climate change, there's also UNCCD and how you combat desertification. And I'm telling you, as a member of the soil care team in the region, that the private sector is going to benefit from the type of increased and improved excellence in terms of how you can do your soil analyses. So the private sector is set and poised to benefit from that. CBD, the Convention on Biodiversity, which is something that doesn't come up in normal circles when you talk about agricultural development, but there's funding available from there as well. I'm part of the consulting team that is doing the NISAP for Barbados, and I can tell you that one of the sources of revenue don't only come from your conventional biological diversity. There's UNEP finance as well. But we move on. What I'm here to promote is something that I've been discussing for a number of years called the triple carriageway. We have had a history of underdevelopment, and we have been blessed by having small land masses. So that to have any project take off vertically and land vertically is almost impossible. We require a platform, we require a runway to launch anything in this part of the world. And I'm suggesting that we can use this triple carriageway as the 3 lanes of the runway that jettisons this whole FAST project. And the 3 areas are going to be creativity, science, and intellectual property. And those are some areas that I know a little bit about. So in terms of creativity, we have heard for the entire morning that there must be product differentiation. Any investor in the OECS that goes into a commodity is taking a really serious risk. Because commodities, by definition, depend on economies of scale. You are blessed with a small land mass. And as I've been saying for years, when land space is limited, head space has to be expanded. So that you can't expect to go into a commodity, go into some sort of differentiated product, whether it be CMOS that is branded as coming from St. Lucia, etc. We must be involved in loop value chains. Greg will tell you that I've been beating this point for years, that a value chain in agriculture is never from farm to fork or from farm to consumer. It must be from farm to farm. This has been pioneered now and very popular now in terms of the circular economy. But it's really a loop value chain. Understanding that our nutrients must be recycled. Your unique value proposition. You heard Ms. Daniel, you heard Prof. talking about that as well. And the digital interface marketing. The use of QR codes. I mean, Ms. Daniel spoke about the packaging material and so. How many of us as private sector representatives or within this agriculture industry use QR codes to, 1, show how our product has been produced, what differentiates it, how are we going to use the product. So think about the possibility of having a QR code on your CMOS drink, which takes you now to a link that shows the alleged properties. And we're not going to get into all of the alleged properties of CMOS. No, please, yes. I understand that, but I'm saying under the rubric of creativity, under the rubric of creativity, you see the wide expanse of choices that you have there. And how many of us as private sector representatives, as private people involved in the private sector and invested in agriculture, have taken a look at our country's NDCs, the naturally determined contributions? How many of us know, as St. Lucians or as Grenadians, what the government has projected in terms of its nationally determined contributions, which is its ticket? It is ATM card for the GCF. How many of us have aligned our production, our strategies, to take advantage of what the government has agreed to do and is legally committed to do in terms of their naturally determined contributions and where they're going to be attempting to do mitigation, etc. So that's the first of the triple carriageway. The second one is science. So there must be an increased dependence on the aided senses. As a scientist, I know that when I say observation, I don't mean just peeping. Observation in science has to do with the use of the aided senses, whether it be aiding those senses that have to do with your vision, so that you use a microscope. If it has to do with observing a volcano, Minister Caesar didn't have the observatory looking at the volcano with somebody putting their hand on the ground, I'm so sensitive, but you need a seismograph for that, right? So we need to aid our senses so that all of our activities should be embracing those scientific concepts. And my colleague, your your predecessor, Lynch, George Alsey, reminded me to insist that we mention something that we both worked on a lot in the OECS, agricultural health and food safety standards. And Ms. Daniel mentioned it as well as part of the requirements for international export. And then there's the commitment to replicability. And this is something that we lose sight of as investors most times. So you had a fantastic crop because you used product X. That in and of itself is not a very scientific way to go about stuff, and to think that I'm just going to commit myself to this particular product or set up circumstances without understanding the full implications of replicability. And then there's the interconnectedness of operations. I mean, I think that literally goes without saying. And then there's the area that I feel most comfortable with, intellectual property. Because I'm here to stand up and question all of the audience, both virtual and present. How many of you have ever done an IP audit? How many of you have ever had your intellectual property valued? And don't forget yourself and tell me you don't own any intellectual property, because you do, right? I don't have the time now for that sermon, but I can assure you that you do. And I'm not just beating my gums, you know. I live all of this, right? And another slide, I'll tell you how I walk this talk. So I'm not just advocating something that I read in a text somewhere, right? This is how I've run my company for the last 20 years. And I'm telling you that branding, the use of utility models and innovation patterns. I mean, I'm so pleased that in Grenada, where I live now, the Prime Minister shared not just study space with the head of the intellectual property organization, office, in Trinidad. So we have a mutual friend now who is there to push the Prime Minister of Grenada to improve what we are doing in intellectual property. Geographical indications. I lament every time I talk about nutmeg or about soursop that there is no, or arrowroot. Well, Minister Caesar and I have had a long running discussion on that in terms of the geographical indications that we need. Traditional knowledge. Here in St. Vincent, I've worked with the Garifuna community out of Belize. Dominica, you have the Kalinago community. What have we done to not only leverage and protect some of this traditional knowledge and some of the preparations of CMOS? I'm sorry to be so fixated on CMOS, but I'm 67 years old, so you would understand. You would understand why I'm so interested, right? And then there's the UPOV conventions. How many of you know that there's protection afforded to you in terms of plant variety and plant innovations? And this is an aspect of our investments that we really have ignored to our peril. And after all this grand talk, have I actually been walking this talk? Yes, I have. My company has creatively carved out a digitally accessible, app-based niche with respect to climate-smart agriculture, using a plethora of scientific disciplines to develop a trademarked auditing, training, certification, and smart contract ready, I haven't mentioned smart contracts as yet, smart contract ready tool. So I've walked this talk, I've been down this road, and in terms of this fast and private sector investment, I think it should be guided by creativity, using your niches and digitalization for your marketing and packaging. It should be based on scientific determinants, as I've tried to allude to, and it must be leveraged. And I use this term without any fear of contradiction. It must be leveraged with your intellectual property, because not only are you supposed to expand your head space when you have limited land space, but we must treat intellectual property as an economic reality as opposed to a legal imposition. Thank you very much.